In this lesson, we're going to look at equivalent fractions, a very important skill when it comes to adding and subtracting fractions. The first step we're going to do is finding the least common multiple of two numbers. We also call that the LCM. So in this example, we've got two numbers, 6 and 10, and so we're going to list their multiples. So with 6 times 1 is 6, times 2 is 12, times 3 is 18, times 4 is 24, etc. And then we'll do the same with 10. So 10, 20, 30, and right now the word bingo or bells should be going off in your head because there is a number in common. Okay, so 30 is the lowest or the least multiple of both of those numbers that they have in common. So you want the first number that's a multiple of both of the two given numbers. If you have strong mental math skills, you can do this mentally. You don't need to actually write out the numbers. But if you write out the multiples of two numbers, you can find the least common multiple this way. There are more methods. The second method is to look at the two numbers, and this is a special case here. If you look at 5 and 15, you can see that 5 is a factor of 15, or that 15 is a multiple of 5. So if one of the numbers is a factor of the other, the least common multiple will be, in this case 15, will be the larger number, because 15 is a multiple of 15, and it's a multiple of 5. Finding the lowest common denominator, which we call the LCD in fractions, is really important for addition and subtraction. So when we look at these two fractions, in this example 3/5 and 1/4, and we want to find the lowest common denominator, it's actually the same thing as finding the least common multiple of those two denominators. So let's take a look at 5 and 4. So 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, etc. And with 4, we can go 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, bingo. There's our least common multiple. Okay, so the LCD of 3/5 and 1/4 is 20. It's the least common denominator. So here's another example, 2/7 and 5/6. Why don't you press pause on the recording and go through this exercise of listing the multiples, or use your mental math skills and come up with what would the lowest common denominator for those two fractions be. Then press play and check. So if I look at 7 and 6, I can list my multiples: 7, 14, 21, 28, 35, 42, and at this point I'm going, whoa, I think 42 is a multiple of 6. And you might double check your 6 times tables, possibly even without writing out all of the multiples, and recognize that yes, the LCM, the least common multiple of 7/6, or the lowest common denominator for 2/7 and 5/6, will be 42. When you're dealing with numbers that are not as easy to work with as the ones that we've just had, especially if you have really large denominators, this 3-step procedure will really help you to find the lowest common denominator. And the steps are to write each denominator as a product of its prime factors, which we practiced earlier, and then list all the prime factors that appear in either product, and then form a product of those prime factors using each factor the greatest number of times it appears in any one denominator. I'll demonstrate that with this example here for 2/15 and 7/40. I have two larger denominators here, 15 and 40, so I want to find the lowest common denominator, or the least common multiple, of those two numbers. So I'm going to express them using prime factors. So 15 is 3 times 5. And 40 is 5 times 8. Oops, let me just fix that 5 up a second. And 5 is a prime number, but 8 is 2 times 4. 2 is prime, but 4 has is 2 times 2. So here are all my prime factors, okay? So my lowest common denominator will be, I've done step A here, so now I'm going to look at step B, and I'm going to pull out all of the prime factors. Okay, so there's a 3, and I'm going to multiply them. So times 5 times, now the 5 is repeated here in the second number. So in the first number I've got the 3 and the 5. The 5 has been repeated in the second number, so I don't need to use it. But I need to use all 3 of these 2's because they all appeared in the same number. So I'm going to go 3 times 5 times 2 cubed, and that will give me 15 times 8, which is 120. So the lowest common denominator of 15 and 40 will be 120. And this method works beautifully for large denominators where it's trickier to figure out what the lowest common denominator would be. Oops. Okay, so let's now look at what the next step is. So now that we have different methods for finding the lowest common denominator, we want to look at a few things, and this actually is number theory, but it's number theory that most people have a very strong intuition for. What happens when you multiply any number by 1? So if I go 7 and I multiply it by 1, or if I go negative 352 and I multiply by 1, or I take 1/2 and I multiply it by 1, it actually gives its equivalent value, doesn't it? So 7 times 1 equals 1. 7. It doesn't change the value. Okay? And then the second piece that we need to think about is what type of fraction is equal to 1. So what kind of fraction is equal to 1? And that's going to be the type of fraction where your numerator is equal to your denominator. So if you have a fraction like 3/3, the numerator and denominator are both 3. So if you think about a pizza, it's been sliced into 3 equal slices, and you've got all 3 of those slices. Or 3 of the 3 people all have blue eyes. So any fraction where the numerator and the denominator are the same number all equal 1. And they're all equal to each other as well. Okay, so now we're going to practice taking some fractions and figuring out what their lowest common denominator is, and then creating equivalent fractions using the lowest common denominator. So we already looked at 3/5 and 1/4 earlier in the lesson, and we know that their lowest common denominator is 20. So we're going to decide what type of fraction we're going to multiply each of those by so that we get a fraction that has the lowest common denominator. So we're going to turn them both into something over 20. So if you think about your multiplication skills for fractions, you know that you multiply the denominators and you multiply the numerators. But we have to multiply by 1 because we want it to be an equivalent fraction, okay? I'm going to just put a star there. And we're going to put one right here. That was going to work. There we go. This is really important, that it's equivalent, okay? So 5 times what gives you 20? Well, that would be 5 times 4, correct? So if we're going to turn this fraction into the number 1, it has to be 4 over 4. So 3/5 times 1 equals something over 20. So 3 times 4 gives us 12. So 12/20 is equal to 3/5. If I had 3/5 of a pizza, or if I had 12/20 of a pizza, They're both the same thing. Let's try this now with 1/4. So I want to multiply it by the number 1 to get my new denominator. So I'm going to figure out what I need to multiply 4 by to get 20, and that's the number 5. So my fraction will be 5/5. And again, using my multiplication rules, I end up with 5/20. Okay, so now let's try this with, oh, my star didn't move. There we go. Let's try this with the two fractions, 2/15 and 7/40. We know from earlier that the LCD of these is 120. So I want to turn 2/15 into something with 120 as its denominator. So you might, this is one of those points at which, especially with large numbers, I'd be okay with you checking with a calculator, but I want you to make a good guess first as to what it is that you need to multiply 15 by to get to 120. And the answer is 8. 15 times 8 gives me 120, so I have to multiply 2 by 8 as well to get 16/120. So I'm multiplying my fraction by 1, so this number, 16/120, is equal to 2/15. And let's try it with 7/40. Oops. And I'm multiplying it by something over something to get something over 120. So 40 times 3 will give me 120. So this fraction becomes 3/3, and I have 21/120. And that is the end of this lesson.